Well, my friends, welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about something that's a little bit outside my normal wheelhouse. We're going to talk about a conversation that I had with two friends about a book that I didn't like. In fact, I've now read two books in a row that I didn't like. Why I told them that I didn't regret reading those books, and I'm going to hopefully convince you to expand your own reading list. Even if that means you're not reading anything right now, maybe we'll set a goal for you to read one book next year. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to the Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
Okay, let me set the stage for you. So I talked about a book, I think on one of my podcasts. I talked to one of my friends about this book that I was reading, about statistics. And, I think I even mentioned in the podcast that the guy had some assumption problems, but I was hoping it would come around and that I would end up liking it. It turned out I didn't. I ended up really disliking it because the guy's political bias showed through, his willingness to make only one possible assumption as the only solution, which also happened to align with his political beliefs in really complex situations, was pretty evident. It just wasn't a very non-biased book. It was intellectual-esque is what I would call it. And I didn't enjoy it. And so a friend of mine told me, he said, hey, I'm thinking about getting that book. And I was like, okay, man, I hated that book. He was like, really? I thought you loved it. That's why I was going to get it. And so then we got talking about books that I read that I dislike. And then I just got done reading another book. Well, I'm not quite done. I'm almost done reading another book about Jeffrey Epstein. And I probably, like most Americans, believe that there's something a little bit goofy going on there in how he died. It seems strange to me that he died by suicide. I don't actually buy that. And this book was going to explain, in theory, how he was able to, operate for as long as he did. And it's just literally conjecture and innuendo. And, well, this person said this in a letter to that person. And there's just nothing there. And I've struggled with this one, maybe even a little bit more than the one on the numbers. I've even skipped a chapter, which I don't do often. But I want you to hold that part. I did skip a chapter. So here's the question. Why would you read a book that you dislike? Now, we talk about, surrounding ourselves with people around us that we maybe we don't agree with, or reading and interacting with ideas that we don't agree with. We don't often talk, I don't think, about interacting with things that we dislike. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, I just want to tell you this. There are books I DNF. I just don't like them. And those are typically fictional books that I'll DNF. I'll read it, and if it gets to a point where I'm just slogging through it, I won't finish it. Now that I think about it, the last 3 books I've read, well, that's not true because I read a couple of those. I read a lot of books at once, and so sometimes I have to think this through. But I have read 3 books this month that I didn't like. One of them I did finish, and it was fiction because I really liked the author, and I just kept hoping it would get better, and it didn't. So I do want to just take a moment, though, and tell people, like, if you're in book reading culture, there is this weird culture about how many books did you read this year? And I think it's part of Goodreads. If you don't know what Goodreads is, it's like a database where you can keep track of your books and you can see what your friends are doing, et cetera, et cetera. It's like Facebook for reading, I guess. And, in my Goodreads, I set a goal every year that I know I'm comfortable with. I'm going to read, 62 or 52 books a year, and I know that I'll hit that. But there is I read all of these books. I read all of these books this year. I read these amount of pages. And it's like a contest to see how much you can consume rather than a idea of, okay, what am I consuming? Why am I consuming it? And do I enjoy it? And those are the things that matter to me. What are the books that I'm going to consume? I consume a lot of books across a variety of topics. And from nonfiction to fiction, I read a lot of fiction, I read a lot of nonfiction, I read a lot of biographies. But I'm consuming it for my enjoyment and my education and betterment. And so when I get into a fictional book that I'm just dragging on, I don't finish it. And there are some books that are nonfiction that I'll DNF, or I will read them, skim more than read. because the most precious commodity that I have in my life is time. And this is where it's a little bit nebulous. I joke a little bit, it's a little bit of witchcraft. You have to kind of come up with your own formula for why you're going to DNF. If you don't know, DNF means did not finish. Why you're going to stop on a book. There was a book that I DNF mostly I just got away from it for, 10 years. I actually think it was 10 years. And this past year, it started to get a lot of hype on some circles that I run in online regarding books. And so I started reading it, and I read the whole, it's a tome. It's like 1,400 pages. And I had read the first 500. I didn't like them. I was done. I read the next 900 in a week. So there is some level of, right, is this a slog book, like a book I'm just going to slog through? Is it a book that I don't like it because it challenges me? That can happen with nonfiction. I don't like it because I think it's poorly written. I don't like it because I think it's poorly researched. What is the thing that is the reason that I want to DNF? Once you figure that out, then you get moving. But here's the thing. I would like for you to move books that you don't like because you don't think they meet their premise, especially if it comes to nonfiction books. I'd like you to move that reason to the bottom of the list. And here's why. I read books all the time that I don't agree with, but one of the things that happens is that helps us expand our thinking. It helps us consider perspectives that we might not consider. One of the things that happens is the majority of our life is often managed on habit. It's often managed on rote behaviors. And when we start to engage with books that we don't like, we're forced to examine our own perspectives. We're forced to examine other perspectives. The book on statistics that I just read, he would say stuff and I'd be like, man, that doesn't feel right. I wonder why. So now I've got to engage in critical thinking about the book, about why do I feel this way about what he's saying. And as my friends will tell you, I'm a big proponent of you need to understand the author's worldview that you're reading, right? And I'm shocked by how many people don't do that. They don't investigate the author's worldview of the books they're reading. Now, not so much for fiction, but in there, their worldview will come out. And worldview is how we view the world, which is what shapes how we behave. And so, as I was reading this book, the statistics book, or the other book about Jeffrey Epstein, I was telling a friend of mine who recommended that book to me, it's just like, she clearly has some problems with certain people groups. And she wants you to believe this, she being the author of the second book. But there's not a lot of supporting evidence, and that bothers me, right? But nonetheless, by reading it, first of all, I'm going to encounter people that read that book, and I want to be able to have an intelligent conversation with them. There are books that came out back around COVID that it surprised me. My church friends were all about. Well, what I found out was a lot of people don't finish books. They start them or they read the title and they read the cherry-picked quotes that are running around social media. And when I would ask them, hey, do you know what this author's worldview is? Have you analyzed the book and compared your worldview to it? The answer is often no. And I'm always shocked by that because I want to expand my thinking, but part of expanding my thinking is the reality that I have to examine things that I don't know that I agree with. And then lining right up with our first, benefit there of that it expands our thinking, it actually improves critical thinking, which I kind of talked about a little bit there, because your critical thinking, if you read a book that you don't like a lot of times, let's be honest, in modern society, if we don't like something, we just stop engaging with it. You don't like what somebody's saying on Facebook, you at best scroll on by, maybe you delete and block them, maybe you snooze them for 30 minutes, and there can be benefit to that. There is something to consider about that. There can be benefit to that, but there is also a benefit to challenging our own worldview with other worldviews that contradict it. There is a benefit to challenging our critical thinking level, because the older we become, the more likely we are to be insular in how we operate in the world. The older we become, the more likely we are to be surrounded by people that just think like us. And that does not mean that's only the 50-year-olds' problems. If you're 20 and listen to this, you're a great danger for that. If you're 18 and listening to this, you're a great danger for that. The only ones who don't seem to be bothered by people who think differently than them is 13 and under, by research that I just read last week, which is kind of terrifying. Right? So we want to improve our critical thinking and read books that we don't agree with so that we can then process out, okay, this is the information that was given to me. This is why I accept it, or this is why I reject it. This is what I believe that contradicts what was given to me, and this is why I believe that. There are so many people that don't want to have to think through why they believe what they believe. And reading books that you dislike because you disagree with them is a great way to develop that skill. And by and large, it's relatively safe. I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't want people to be upset with me, or I don't want people to get too intense with me, or blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's fine. Then do this in a book, because the book doesn't talk back. Even if it's an audiobook, it doesn't talk back. I think maybe the most beneficial aspect of continuing through books that you dislike or disagree with is it can build discipline and patience. It can build endurance. In a world that seems so affected, right? We're very ADHD, right? We've joked for decades now. We're the only generation in the history of the world that, drums our fingers waiting for the 30-second microwave to get done so we can eat. All of those things. I actually worry that I listen to audiobooks at about 2.3, 2.5 speed. I actually worry that that is feeding my ADHD in a way that is making it some of my other life tasks more difficult, because when things don't go that fast, I tend to zone out and I want to go faster. So there you go. There's a little foray into my brain. But it does build patience and discipline and endurance when you make yourself read something that you're like, man, I did not enjoy yesterday's reading. I did not enjoy last week's reading. And this is why I wanted to start this with, you got to have kind of your criteria for what's your DNF going to be, what's your DNF criteria, when will you stop reading a book. But at the same time, continuing to read a book can be very beneficial for you, for your brain, for what you do with your brain, and to help you develop continuing on. And we know that there's a lot of benefits to reading books, period. We know that there is a benefit to reading books. It helps with empathy. People who read books tend to be more empathetic. Now, there's a lot of debate over the right amount of empathy. There's a lot of debate over, is empathy being weaponized today? I talked a little bit about this, that empathy alone is not enough. I talked about that in another episode. Be sure to look that up. We looked at empathy as it needs to be tied to something greater. But it does help you, because what is empathy? Empathy is trying to understand another's worldview, another's point of reference, another's perspective. It's trying to understand a story that you wouldn't typically inhabit, and how the people in that story came to whatever it is that they believe. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with reading books that we dislike. I don't regret reading either one of these books. The one on Epstein, I might actually get to where I regret. And it's a 2-volume book, so I might not read the second volume. But then, so for me, I will kind of run that out and be like, well, if I don't read the second volume, what if there's something in there that makes the slog of the first volume worth it, and I missed out on that? And so there's a risk reward there, which does bring me to my next kind of point, which is sometimes continuing to read a book that you disagree with, or that you dislike, or that you think was poorly written or poorly researched, or the logic isn't logicking. Sometimes you get to a spot you're like, oh, and then everything just kind of falls into place. And that's a really cool experience. I've had that happen. So I don't know what I'll do with that book. And so when you start running those out, what does it mean for us to keep reading books? What are the benefits? Those are important. It can improve your learning, right? Because almost every book I've read that I didn't like, I was like, oh, I didn't know that. There's almost always a fact everywhere. I've read a few books. I was like, nope, this is just an opinion piece disguised as a scholarly piece, and those aren't the same. And sometimes that happens, which does then beg another question. How do we decide if a book is worth finishing? And one of the questions that I will often ask myself is, why do I dislike this book? Do I disagree with the conclusions? Do I dislike, for instance, the statistics book that I read? What's interesting to me is in the end of the book, he actually admitted this. He confused often causation and correlation. He oversimplified really complex things, and he admitted that that's a temptation, right? And so is it a dislike? The only type of dislike that I will typically automatically, I'm done, is if it's poorly written or incoherent. I'm typically done. Because if it's poorly written, and I don't mean like a few typos, I mean like really just poorly written, it's probably not going to be worth my time. And so I will look at that a lot. My return on investment, your ROI. What is my return on investment? If I knock this book out, what's the investment I get? Price is what you pay, value is what you get. I'm going to pay. I've already paid for the book, but I'm also going to pay time to read it. What's the value? Now, here's the thing. There are some books where I'll stop reading them, where they're like the statistics book, where the correlation and causation is just completely upside down. Because at some point I'm going to have to make a decision. What is the likelihood or probability that this author has something else in this book that I'm going to find value in? So sometimes I'll read books and it'll be about a field that I am very familiar with. And they will talk about things. I'm like, yeah, but that isn't actually how it works in that field. I'll give them one or two of those, but by the time we get to 3, I'm probably done. I'm probably completely done with the book. So I want to look at what kind of dislike is it? Is it I just find it irritating? Okay, well then I'm probably going to keep going for a little bit. Is it confusing? As in because it's the way it's written, it's confusing? I'm going to give that some more time. Is it confusing because I don't understand the material? That I'm going to keep going for sure, and I might even pull in other sources to help me understand it. And then, there is the good, you'll hear it. Sometimes people say 10, 20 rule. Sometimes people say 30% rule. Essentially, give a book 10 to 20%, 30%. You read that much of it before you decide what you're going to do. One of the things that I will do is I will often read the conclusion before I read the rest of the book, especially in nonfiction books, because I want to know where they're ending up once I've read the introduction, maybe the first 2 chapters. If I'm starting to kind of slog, I'm going to skip ahead and I'm going to read the conclusion, and I'm going to see if, okay, maybe that piques my interest, because there's a reason I picked up this book. There's a reason that I started reading it, and I don't want to lose sight of that in the process of, disliking it. I don't want to lose sight of the reason why I picked it up. Now, we're back to that original return on investment. I might end up deciding that the reason I picked it up is not going to be a good enough return on the investment that is required for me to read it. And that's okay too. Okay, so maybe if you don't read books, you're thinking, why in the world am I listening to this? If you've listened this far, I would love to encourage you, try to read 2 books next year. That's 1 book every 6 months. Basically, most books are 300 pages. You can work that out, that math out pretty easily. If you read 10 pages a day, you're going to knock out a lot of books. If you read 5 pages a day, you're still going to knock out a lot of the book. And find books that interest you. Maybe start out with fiction, and a lot of this won't matter to you. But one of the best ways that you can consume information and you can sharpen yourself is by reading books written by people that you don't agree with on topics you care about. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that for those of you who are readers, this is something that you've thought about. If you're not a reader, maybe it's something that you will think about now. Do me a favor, share this with a friend if you find value in it. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.